Today is Juneteenth. Juneteenth is Independence Day. I love this day because this day for me represents so much. But on the list of what it represents to me is teaching, education, and believe it or not, football. I'm going to get into this because what I've come to understand about subjects such as the Tulsa Race Massacre and Juneteenth is that there are so many who just don't know, who ask why they weren't taught this in school, even as we're in a shortfall and we can't pay our teachers enough, to live. And we're going through this point in our history where folks are finding out that their parents and their grandparents just chose not to tell them stories of our more horrific past, the things that make us both Oklahomans, Tulsans, and Americans. Juneteenth is a day for everyone to celebrate because, as I have said, it is in everybody's best interest to be inclusive and diverse because then you get what you actually want, which is a high-performing business or a high-performing team and making more money. Who doesn't like more money? Who does not like working in their own self-interest? And that is one reason for which you should celebrate Juneteenth. It's also a reason as to why the SEC, that not the Security and Exchange Commission, but the Southeastern Conference, issued a statement yesterday to the state of Mississippi saying, change the state flag or you will not host any more SEC competitions. For those of you that don't know, Mississippi state flag has the Confederate flag in it. Each time it has been up for vote for removal, the state has upheld it. They like it that way. Tells you a lot about Mississippi. And it also tells you a lot about where we are in this moment when Greg Sankey's going, nah, enough is enough. We're going to do what we can. Now, they're not doing the thing where they're pulling the $43.8 million that they extend to the member schools from Ole Miss and Mississippi State. But this is a step in the right direction. And then on the SEC Twitter account, the place that did not integrate college football until 1966 with Kentucky, the same year that Texas Western stopped a mud hole in the University of Kentucky and walked dry in the NCAA basketball championship in a game that was Disneyfied into Glory Road. Big Daddy D, David Lattin in the Prairie View Interscholastic League, which I'm going to get into. They're saying, no, enough, because we know that so many of our football players, basketball players, track and field athletes are black. In a country where just 13% of the population is black. So you could go read in Smithsonian Magazine, before emancipation, America's slaves and anyone else who prized equality, freedom, and liberty knew that the Declaration of Independence only meant equality, freedom, and liberty for some. Frederick Douglass is quoted here when I say, what to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is constant victim. Said those words in 1852 on July 4th, what we recognize nationally as Independence Day. Less than 10 years later, the North went to war with the South because the South fired the first shot. The South committed an act of treason, seceded from the United States, formed its own government in Richmond, Virginia, and fought for a right and a way of life it believed it needed, which was to subjugate and enslave people who looked like me. The Confederacy lasted 4 years. Okay? There's no need to glorify something that was outlasted by Breaking Bad, that was outlasted by The Wire, that was outlasted by the Golden State Warriors dynasty, and they're the worst basketball team in the NBA today. There's no need for this. But not to glorify is not to forget. We will never forget because it is part of who we are. And then the Emancipation Proclamation was uttered by Abraham Lincoln, but it was not law. And it certainly was not law in the middle of a war in 1863. For which the South was like, yeah, you can do whatever you want, but right now, we're fighting you. So on June 19th, 1865, Union General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, bringing news to the town that the Civil War had ended and that all slaves free. This was nearly 2.5 years after President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. Before long, the former slaves in southeastern Texas began to celebrate June 19th as Emancipation Day. Eventually, it gets shortened to Juneteenth because across the country, so many slaves found out at different points during the week. I have a joke that I tell my friends where a free black man is walking a road in the South and sees another black man picking cotton, looking disheveled and depressed, to which he would ask him, "Yo, man, what you doing?" I'm picking cotton for the masses. "Yeah, man, you ain't got to do that no more. Like, we free." And what a mind bend that must be. And how much convincing it must have taken then to figure out wait a second, what is this? What is this levity that I feel? What is this confusion that I feel? What do I do now? Whatever I want, which is the point, right? That's being American. In Michael Hurd's book, Thursday Night Lights, the story of black high school football in Texas, you can read, when the war ended, there was a South in economic ruin because the entire economic model that it had been built on was upended. Devastation was exacerbated by emancipation, which finally arrived in 1865. Newly freed slaves and their families fled from the cotton fields to wherever freedom was and whatever it meant. They scattered and established self-sustaining freedmen's towns, such as St. John's Colony in Caldwell County in Texas, Shankleville in Newton County in Texas, Kendleton in Fort Bend County in Texas, Lincolnville in Coryell County in Texas, and Moccasin Bend. But freedmen primarily settled in East Texas. You know, that East Texas is just down there below Oklahoma state line, that one. By 1900, blacks owned more than a quarter of Texas farmland. Own stuff, own land. Owning my house is a historic achievement as well as a personal one. More urban-minded African Americans flocked to Houston, San Antonio, and Dallas to find work and establish freedmen's neighborhoods. Throughout East Texas, blacks found work in the lumber industry, hauling pulpwood, working in sawmills, well into the 20th century. The first schools for black, remember, education, was in Willis, Texas. It's called this colored school, a log structure, opened in 1889, land run time. Before then, in the 1870s, two white men who tried to teach black children came to what is called mysterious ends. According to a history of Montgomery County in Texas, in 1870, a Yankee came from Illinois to Montgomery to teach a 3-month school for Negroes. In a few weeks, he disappeared and he was soon replaced by another who taught for a few weeks. One morning, the children went to school and their teacher did not arrive. Finally, someone reported that the professor had been found drowned in Town Creek. Black folks were told that the man had slipped from a footlog while crossing the stream and drowned. Other reports were that he was murdered and thrown into the creek by local citizens who resented a Yankee teaching black folks. In the same book, you can read about Tamina. Tamina is a straight shot from, Conroe. Mostly black community at the time, was named for late 18th century New York City political organization Tammany Hall, which was founded to help the Irish, among others. When the town applied with the Postal Department for service, its name was misspelled on the application. The pronunciation stuck, though, and so did the errant spelling. The one-room black school in Tamina was named for Phyllis Wheatley. A single teacher instructed grades 1 to 6 until 1949. When the school closed, its students were bused to Conroe. The lack of teachers in Tamina put them at a disadvantage. And this is what Frank Moning called the smartest kids in the 6th grade helped teach 1st and 2nd grades, so a lot of us were left behind. After purchasing a first-class ticket on June 7, 1892, and boarding the East Louisiana Railway train in New Orleans, a light-skinned Creole colored man by the name Plessy, Homer, chose to take up a seat in the whites-only coach. on the car. He was arrested and charged with violating the Louisiana segregation statute of 1890. Plessy's arrest was a coordinated effort by the Citizens Committee of New Orleans, which wanted to test and overturn Louisiana's Separate Car Act, which required equal but separate train accommodations for blacks and whites. The committee filed a writ arguing the law violated the 13th and 14th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution, same ones that are written today, specifically the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The case, styled Plessy v. Ferguson, was appealed to the Louisiana Supreme Court, which held that the law was constitutional. Ferguson was the judge at the time. The committee then appealed the case to the U.S. Supreme Court. A decision in Ferguson's or Louisiana's favor was handed down on May 18th, 1896. The ruling upheld separate but equal, a doctrine and legalized racial segregation in public accommodations. For education, that meant separate schools for black and white students, a principle that held until 1954. We've only been doing this integrated school systems thing for like 75 years, y'all. Writing for the majority in Plessy's case, Justice Henry Billings Brown wrote, quote, "The object of the 14th Amendment was undoubtedly to enforce the absolute equality of the two races before the law. But in the nature of things, it could not have been intended to abolish distinctions based on color or to enforce social as distinguished from political equality or the commingling of the two races upon terms unsatisfactory to either." Before the Civil War, there were just 28 black folks with undergraduate degrees. It's 28. When the war began, every southern state except Tennessee prohibited the formal instruction of slaves or free blacks. There were only two black colleges in existence before the Civil War, founded by Quakers and Methodist Episcopalians, which is one of the reasons why the African Methodist Episcopalian Church is such a big deal in my life and the first church that I was raised in with my late grandmommy. It gave rise to Lincoln University, among others, where Thurgood Marshall, Langston Hughes, and Cab Calloway were trained. And in football, so too was Franz Jazz Bird. So just a year after Gordon Granger showed up in Galveston, Texas, a Norfolk, Virginia piece appeared, 1866, that railed against northern intrusion into the affairs of the South, saying, quote, "Of all the insults to which the southern people had been subjected, this was the heaviest to bear. To have sent among us a lot of ignorant, narrow-minded, bigoted fanatics, ostensibly for the purpose of propagating the gospel among the heathen and teaching our little black and big black and all kinds of blacks to read the Bible, to show them the road to salvation." This was a piece in the newspaper that wanted to prevent black folks from reading the Bible. Texas Constitution 1866 provided that the income derived from public school fund be employed exclusively for the education of white scholastic inhabitants. But by 1870, black folks had raised more than $1 million for their own private education, which led one historian to say it's as if the entire race wanted to be educated all at once. With the help of the Freedmen's Bureau, championing black education for the 5 years following the end of the Civil War, we saw more than 150 schools established in the state of Texas alone. We saw more than 57,330 black students ranging in age from 3 to 90. And in this, we got football. Football was a place for which you didn't necessarily think about what was going on around you. They put a ball in front of you and said, "Can y'all play?" And Bubba Smith said, "Yeah, I can play." And Eldridge Dickey said, "Yeah, I can play." Frank Monin said, "Yeah, I can play." Otis Taylor said, "Yeah, I can play." Shaq Harris said, "Yeah, I can play." By 1966, Grambling and Florida A&M had more professional football players than just every college except Notre Dame. The AFL owes its existence to Black college football and the ingenuity of the Prairie View Interscholastic League. If not for Juneteenth, we would not have these things to celebrate. If not for a president believing in the Constitution and what was right, we would not have this to celebrate. If not for the ingenuity of so many white folks and every Black person, we would not be here now. Juneteenth is an Independence Day of the highest order because it was earned. It was earned. We must continue to earn it every day. As my favorite football coach today says, hey, those guys won Big 12 championships. Those guys made the college football playoff. Those guys won 12 games. Y'all ain't won nothing. Today, once again, it's 0-0. Earn the win. Earn the win.